That cold morning, no one expected an act of compassion to change everything. What started as another quiet day near the reserve became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, every roar and every breath matters, because behind every white tiger there is a story worth saving. The frost clung to the edges of the empty highway like a fragile memory, the kind that cracks under the weight of the first light. Jack Harlan gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup, the engine's low rumble the only sound cutting through the silence of the pre-dawn hours. He was a man of routines, hauling freight from one forgotten town to the next, his life a series of dusty roads and motel rooms that smelled of stale coffee and regret. At 42, Jack carried the quiet ache of a widower. His wife gone 3 years now, from a sudden illness that left him hollowed out, driving these back roads to outrun the emptiness. The reserve loomed on his left, a vast stretch of pine and shadow where the world felt wilder, untamed. He rarely thought about it. Wildlife was something for rangers and tourists, not for a man like him who fixed what he could and moved on. But that morning, as the truck's headlights sliced through the fog, something caught his eye on the shoulder of the road. A small shape huddled against the chill, its fur matted and pale against the grey asphalt. Jack slowed, his breath fogging the windshield. At first, he thought it was a stray dog, maybe one of those mutts that wandered from the farms nearby, half-starved and desperate. He pulled over, the tires crunching on loose gravel, and killed the engine. The silence rushed in, heavy and absolute, broken only by the distant call of a crow. Stepping out, Jack zipped his jacket higher against the bite of the wind. His boots crunched on the thin layer of ice as he approached, his heart picking up a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, exactly, but a flicker of something protective, like the old days when he'd coax his wife's ailing cat through the nights. The creature was tiny, no bigger than a loaf of bread, its sides heaving with shallow breaths that puffed out in weak clouds. White fur, almost ethereal in the dim light, streaked with mud and what looked like dried leaves. Its eyes, barely open, were a striking blue, wide with exhaustion, but not yet dulled by surrender. It whimpered softly, a sound so fragile, it twisted something deep in Jack's chest. "Poor thing," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. He knelt slowly, extending a gloved hand, waiting for it to snap or flee. But it didn't. Instead, the puppy, he told himself, leaned into his touch, its body trembling as if the cold had seeped into its bones. No collar, no tags, just this lost soul on the edge of nowhere. Jack's mind raced with half-formed worries. Coyotes in the night, or worse, the traffic that barreled through without mercy. He couldn't leave it here. Not like this. Scooping it up gently, he felt the warmth of its small form against his coat, the rapid flutter of its heart, like a bird trapped in his palms. It was lighter than he expected, its paws dangling limply, but it nuzzled closer, seeking the heat of his body. Back in the truck, Jack wrapped it in an old blanket from the passenger seat, the one his wife had knitted years ago, soft and faded now. The cub curled into it, its breathing easing just a fraction, those blue eyes fixing on him with a trust that unnerved him. "Hang in there, little guy," he said, starting the engine. The heater blasted warm air, and he glanced at the clock. 5:47 a.m. The nearest town, Elmwood, was 20 miles back, with a vet clinic that opened early for farmers. Dr. Elena Reyes, he'd heard, was the one to see for strays. Jack wasn't one for asking favors, but this felt different, necessary. The drive blurred into a haze of yellow lines and rising sun, the cub's soft whines the only companion to his thoughts. What if it was hurt bad? Rabies? No, those eyes were too clear, too pleading. He remembered his wife's last days, the way she'd clung to his hand, silent in her suffering. This was just an animal, he told himself, but the parallel lingered, a quiet ache. By the time he pulled into Elmwood's main street, the town was stirring. Coffee shops flickering on lights, a few early risers walking dogs under the bare oaks. The vet clinic sat on the edge, a squat brick building with a sign that read Reyes Animal Care in weathered letters. Jack carried the bundle inside, the bell above the door jingling like an alarm. The waiting room was empty, smelling of antiseptic and hay. Elena Reyes emerged from the back, her dark hair tied back, white coat over jeans, her face lined with the exhaustion of someone who answered calls at all hours. She was in her late 30s, a vet who'd chosen this rural life after years in the city, drawn to the wild edges where animals didn't come with owners' expectations. "What have we got?" she asked, her voice steady but curious as Jack unwrapped the blanket on the exam table. "Looks like a puppy," Jack said, stepping back, his hands suddenly awkward at his sides. "Found it on the highway near the reserve. Freezing out there. Thought it might need warming up, maybe some milk or whatever." Eleanor leaned in, her gloved hands gentle as she examined the creature. It mewled softly, not resisting, its white coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She checked its gums, pale but moist, felt along its ribs, noting the slight dehydration, but no obvious breaks. "It's a fighter, that's for sure," she murmured, her brow furrowing as she tilted its head. The blue eyes met hers, unblinking, and for a moment the room felt smaller, the air thicker. Jack watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a knot of relief loosening in his gut. He'd done something right at least, but as Elena parted the fur on its neck, peering closer, her expression shifted. A pause, heavy and unspoken. She straightened, glancing at Jack with eyes that held a new weight. "This isn't a puppy," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a cub, a white tiger cub." The words hung in the sterile air, and Jack's world tilted. Outside, the sun climbed higher, but in that moment, the cold morning's chill seemed to seep back in, wrapping around them all. The cub's breath hitched a soft plea, and Jack felt the first stir of something profound, an instinct he couldn't name, pulling him toward the unknown. The revelation settled over the exam room, like a sudden fog, thick and disorienting. Jack stood frozen in the doorway, his arms still crossed, as if to hold himself steady, while Elena's words echoed in the quiet space. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting stark shadows on the linoleum floor. The cub lay on the table, its tiny chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms, oblivious to the storm it had unleashed. Those blue eyes, so trusting moments ago, now seemed to hold a deeper mystery, a wild secret wrapped in innocence. Elena peeled off her gloves with deliberate slowness, her movements precise, betraying none of the turmoil flickering in her dark eyes. She'd seen exotic cases before, smuggled parrots, injured owls from the reserve, but this, a white tiger cub here in Elmwood of all places, born in captivity, escaped or poached. The possibilities clawed at her mind, but she pushed them aside, focusing on the immediate. The cub's fur, soft and unnaturally pale, shimmered under the light, a rarity that spoke of hidden bloodlines, perhaps from the reserve's breeding program gone wrong. It was dehydrated, chilled to the core, but alive, barely. "Jack, right?" she said, her voice low, pulling him back from the edge of his thoughts. "Sit down. This changes everything." Jack moved like a man in a dream, sinking into the plastic chair by the wall. His calloused hands rubbed together, the gravel from the road still embedded in his palms. "A tiger, you're sure?" The word felt absurd on his tongue, like something from a half-remembered documentary, not the shivering bundle he'd cradled like a lost pup. He glanced at the cub, its paws twitching faintly in sleep, and a pang hit him. Not fear, but a fierce protectiveness, the same one that had gripped him on the highway. His wife, Sarah, had always said he had a soft spot for the broken things of the world. Now it stared back at him with whiskers and claws. Elena nodded, washing her hands at the sink, the water running cold and steady. Positive. The markings, the build. It's no domestic breed. White tigers aren't native here. They're from Bengal stock, bred in sanctuaries. This one's maybe 6 weeks old, tops, found alone like that. It shouldn't be. She dried her hands, her gaze lingering on the cub. In her years as a vet, she'd treated farm dogs with broken legs and barn cats with infections, but wildlife like this tested her. The reserve rangers would need to know, protocol demanded it, but calling them meant questions, paperwork, maybe relocation to a facility where the cub's odds weren't great, starvation, stress, human error. She'd seen too many rescues end in quiet euthanasias. Outside, the town of Elmwood stirred fully now, the distant rumble of a delivery truck cutting through the morning hush. Jack's mind raced back to the reserve's edge, the pines whispering secrets in the wind. Had the mother been hit by a car? Poachers dumping evidence? He wasn't naive. Stories circulated about illegal trades, rare animals smuggled for profit. But looking at the cub, all he saw was vulnerability, a life teetering on the brink because of the world's indifference. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Can't just leave it." Elena's expression softened, a rare crack in her professional armor. She was no stranger to hard choices. Her own brother had died young, in a logging accident near the reserve, leaving her with a wariness of the wild. Yet here she was, drawn to it, stitching up the wounded edges of nature. First we stabilize it. Fluids, warmth, maybe some kitten milk formula to start, but we can't keep it here long. It's endangered, protected. The authorities, wildlife services, the reserve, they'll want it. She hesitated, glancing at the phone on the wall. One call and this moment would slip from their hands. The cub stirred then, a soft chuff escaping its muzzle, like a sigh from another world. Jack leaned forward instinctively, his hand hovering near the table before he pulled back. Elena noticed, the quiet gesture speaking volumes. "You found it. That means something," she said, her tone measured. "Most folks would have driven by." Before Jack could respond, the clinic door swung open with a jingle, admitting a gust of crisp air and Tom Hargrove, the local ranger. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered with a weathered face from years patrolling the reserve's borders, Tom carried the scent of pine and damp earth. He'd stopped by for coffee, a routine that often turned into shop talk about coyote sightings or overpopulated deer. But today, his sharp eyes caught the tension immediately. "Eleanor, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's the emergency?" She exchanged a glance with Jack, who nodded silently. No point in hiding it now. Elena gestured to the table. "Tom, take a look. Foundling from the highway." Tom approached, his boots thudding softly on the floor. He leaned in, his face paling as recognition dawned. "Holy! That's no stray. White tiger. Here." His voice dropped, laced with the authority of someone who'd enforced poaching laws more than once. Excitement warred with caution in his eyes. This could be a breakthrough, a lost cub from the sanctuary's escaped litter last month or worse. Black market fallout. We need to secure it, call the feds. Can't have some yahoo thinking it's a pet project. Jack bristled at the implication, his jaw tightening. "I wasn't thinking that, just trying to help." The room felt smaller, the air charged with unspoken judgments. Tom saw risk. Endangered species meant liability, potential danger if the cub grew. Elena saw a patient, imfragile and pleading in its silence. And Jack, he saw a second chance, a small life mirroring his own quiet losses. Tom rubbed his chin, his stance shifting from command to contemplation. "Look, Harlan, I know you. Haul freight through here. Keep to yourself. Decent guy. But this ain't a farm dog. Tigers, they don't forget. And if Mama's out there, we're talking real trouble." He paused, studying the cub's labored breaths, the way its ears flicked at the sound of voices. For a moment, the ranger's hard exterior cracked. He'd lost a patrol partner years back to a bear mauling, a reminder that the wild demanded respect, not sentiment. Elena intervened, her voice steady. "It's weak, Tom, hypothermic, malnourished. If we wait for bureaucracy, it might not make it through the day." She prepared a syringe of warmed saline, her hands trembling just slightly as she inserted the IV line into the cub's foreleg. The creature mewled, a sound like cracking ice, but didn't pull away. Jack watched, transfixed, as the fluid began to flow, a lifeline in the sterile glow. The silence stretched, broken only by the cub's improving rhythm, each breath a small victory. Tom sighed, pulling out his radio, but not keying it yet. "All right, hour to stabilize, then we move. But Harlan, you're in this now. Your call started it." Jack met the ranger's gaze, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Outside, the sun filtered through the clinic windows, warming the frost on the glass. The cub's eyes opened briefly, locking onto Jack's with an intensity that pierced the doubt. In that gaze he saw not danger but a plea, a silent bond forming in the chill of misunderstanding. The road ahead twisted into uncertainty, but for the first time in years, Jack felt anchored, pulled toward a redemption he hadn't sought. As Elena monitored the drip, the three of them stood in vigil, the world outside fading to a distant hum. The cub's warmth returned slowly, pore by pore, and with it the first threads of hope. But shadows lingered, the reserve's secrets, the cub's origins, the choices that could shatter everything. The morning had only begun, and already compassion had cracked open doors long sealed shut. The hours blurred in the clinic's back room, where the air hung heavy with the scent of warmed blankets and antiseptic wipes. Elena adjusted the IV drip, her fingers steady despite the knot in her stomach, watching the cub's flanks rise and fall with a rhythm that steadied, then faltered. Jack sat on a stool nearby, his broad frame hunched forward, elbows on knees, as if willing his own breath into the tiny body. Tom paced the narrow space, his radio clipped to his belt like a reluctant sentinel, the crackle of static a low undercurrent to the silence. Outside, Elmwood's morning traffic hummed faintly, trucks idling at the diner, school buses groaning to life, but in here, time stretched thin, fragile as the cub's whiskers. The creature stirred under the heat lamp Elena had rigged, its pale fur drying into soft waves that caught the light like fresh snow. No longer the mud-caked foundling from the highway, it revealed the subtle stripes of its heritage, faint shadows against the white, a mark of rarity that made Tom's jaw tighten. He'd radioed the reserve station earlier, a terse update to his supervisor, but held off on the feds. Protocol be damned for now. "This could be from the sanctuary breach last fall," he muttered, more to himself than the others, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over wind and wildlife. Litter of 3 cubs gone missing. Poachers or just bad luck. Either way, it's trouble walking on 4 paws. Jack didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the cub. It had nuzzled his hand earlier, during the fluid infusion, a tentative press of damp nose against his skin that sent a shiver through him. Reminded him of Sarah's old border collie, the way it'd curl at his feet during her chemo nights, offering silent company in the dark. He'd failed that dog in the end, put it down too soon after she was gone, guilt twisting like a knife. Now this cub, with its instinctive trust, cracked open that old wound, forcing him to confront the man he'd become, a hauler of loads, not lives. "It's just a baby," he said finally, the words rough, breaking the quiet. "Doesn't know trouble from kindness." Eleanor glanced up from her notes, her pen pausing mid-scratch. She understood that tone, the quiet defense of the vulnerable, her own losses echoed in it. The brother who'd slipped into a ravine during a storm, his body pulled from the mud too late, Wildlife work was her way of rewriting those endings, one stitch at a time. "Instinct's all it has," she agreed softly, checking the cub's temperature. 98 degrees. Better, but the hypothermia had left its mark, the little heart racing erratically under her stethoscope. She prepared a syringe of electrolytes, her hands moving with the practiced grace of someone who'd coaxed life back from edges too many times. As she administered it subcutaneously, the cub let out a weak chuff, its blue eyes fluttering open, locking onto Jack's face with a clarity that pierced the room's tension. Tom stopped pacing, leaning against the counter, arms crossed over his ranger's vest. His moral compass pointed north to duty: protect the wild, contain the risks. White tigers weren't pets or strays, they were symbols of a balance humans kept disrupting. "Kindness is fine, Harlan, but reality bites harder. If word gets out, you'll have every thrill-seeker and collector knocking. And if the mother's out there, God help us, she's not going to knock politely." His words carried the weight of experience, the scars from patrols where compassion clashed with survival. Yet even he couldn't ignore the cub's plea, the way it poured feebly at the blanket, seeking warmth not from the lamp, but from the humans encircling it. The cub's breathing hitched suddenly, a ragged pull that drew them all closer. Elena's brow furrowed, her gloved hand pressing gently on its chest. Dehydration complications, maybe sepsis from exposure, signs she dreaded. "It's struggling," she whispered, the room's silence amplifying her words. Jack's heart clenched, his hand reaching out instinctively, hovering above the cub's head. It leaned into the shadow of his palm, a tremor running through its body, as if drawing strength from the gesture. In that moment the clinic faded, the beeps of monitors, the sterile walls, replaced by the raw pulse of life, teetering. Jack felt it then, the moral suspense coiling tight. Call the authorities and risk the cub's fate in some distant facility, or buy time here, defying the rules for a chance at redemption. Elena worked swiftly, adjusting the oxygen mask she'd improvised from a pet cone, the hiss of the tank, a lifeline in the hush. Tom's radio buzzed, a dispatch from the reserve about unrelated poacher sightings, but he silenced it, his stance softening. "Damn it," he breathed, rubbing his neck. "All right, we monitor through lunch, but if it worsens..." He trailed off, the unspoken hanging, euthanasia as mercy, or relocation as exile. Jack shook his head, a quiet fire kindling in his chest. "Not yet. It trusted me out there. That's gotta count." As the cub's breaths evened, the three settled into an uneasy vigil, the morning light slanting through the blinds in golden shafts. Elena brewed coffee in the corner, the aroma a small comfort, while Jack sketched idle patterns on the floor with his boot, his mind drifting to the empty cab of his truck, the blanket still carrying the cub's scent. The creature slept now, deeper, its paws curling in dreams of forests it might never know. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, a reminder of the wild pressing close. Compassion had woven them together, but the tension simmered. The cub's origins a shadow, the choices ahead a test of who they'd choose to be. In the quiet that followed, Eleanor caught Jack's eye, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The cub's survival wasn't just medical, it was a mirror, reflecting their own buried hopes and fears. Tom's eventual nod sealed the pact. A few more hours, a fragile alliance against the world's judgments. But as the clock ticked toward noon, the cub stirred again, its eyes opening to the room's warmth, a soft rumble building in its throat, not fear, but recognition. The bond deepened, pulling them further into the unknown, where instinct and humanity collided. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and compassion can travel. The noon sun filtered through the clinic's blinds in hazy stripes, casting long shadows across the back room where the air had grown thicker, laced with the faint tang of electrolytes and the cub's warming fur. Jack remained on his stool, his posture unchanged, but his mind churned like the gravel under his truck's tires. Endless loops of doubt and resolve. The cub lay under the heat lamp, its breaths now a steady whisper, each one a fragile thread holding back the unknown. Elena moved quietly between the counter and the exam table, her white coat sleeves rolled up, revealing faint scars from past bites and scratches, badges of a life spent bridging worlds. Tom had stepped out to his patrol truck, radio in hand, promising to check reserve logs for any escaped litters, but his absence left the room feeling exposed, as if the wild could slip through the cracks at any moment. Jack's gaze never strayed far from the cub. Its eyes, half-lidded in shallow rest, flickered occasionally toward him, a silent anchor in the uncertainty. He thought of Sarah again, unbidden, the way her hand had trembled in his during those final hospital nights, her breaths mirroring this small creature's struggle. He'd been too passive then, letting doctors dictate the end. Not this time. The cub's paw twitched, curling as if grasping at dreams of dense jungles far from this sterile cage, and Jack felt a pull, instinctual and profound, urging him to shield it from the judgments circling like vultures. Elena paused in her charting, her pen hovering over the notepad. The cub's temperature had climbed to 100 degrees, a small triumph, but the dehydration had taken its toll, its gums still pale, its movements lethargic. She glanced at Jack, noting the lines etched deeper around his eyes, the quiet weight he carried. "It's holding," she said softly, breaking the hush. "The fluids are helping, but we need to get nutrients in soon. Formula, maybe some goat's milk if it'll take it." Her voice held no optimism, only the measured calm of someone who'd seen miracles curdle into loss. In her mind, the cub wasn't just an animal. It was a test, a mirror to her own guarded heart. After her brother's death, she'd walled off sentiment, treating each case as procedure. But this white rarity, with its pleading gaze, chipped at those walls, whispering of connections she thought she'd buried. Jack nodded, his throat tight. What if it doesn't? What then? The question hung, raw and unadorned, echoing the fears he'd buried under miles of highway. He reached out again, his rough fingers brushing the cub's ear, feeling the velvet warmth returning. It leaned into the touch, a low rumble vibrating through its chest, not a growl, but a purr of sorts, instinctive gratitude that twisted something deep in him. For a moment the room dissolved, and Jack saw not a tiger, but a second chance, to act, to choose compassion over the indifference that had defined his grief. The door jingled from the front, pulling them back. Tom returned, his face grim under the brim of his hat, carrying a thermos of coffee that steamed in the cooler air. "Logs check out, possible match to that sanctuary escape. No mother's been spotted, but tracks near the highway suggest she was close. Could be injured or worse." He set the thermos down, his eyes on the cub, a flicker of reluctance in his stance. Duty warred with empathy. As ranger, he'd relocated dozens of animals, watched some thrive, others fade in captivity's grip. White tigers like this one were icons, symbols of a vanishing wild, but symbols didn't survive on sentiment. "Feds are en route from the regional office. ETA 2 hours. They'll take it to a specialist facility, better equipped, they say." Elena's hands stilled on the IV line, her breath catching. 2 hours. The cub needed stability now, not transport in some rattling van. She imagined the journey, stress spiking its vitals, the cold roads mirroring the highway where it had been found. "It's too soon," she murmured, her voice edged with quiet defiance. "Look at it, Tom. It's barely out of the woods. Moving it could kill it." She adjusted the heat lamp, the soft glow illuminating the cub's stripes, faint ghosts of its heritage against the pristine white. In that light, it seemed less a threat, more a fragile emissary from the reserve's shadowed heart, pleading for the mercy humans so rarely extended. Tom rubbed his jaw. the stubble rasping under his fingers. He'd enforced the rules for years, turning away well-meaning locals with backyard rescues, knowing the wild's logic didn't bend to kindness. But the cub's eyes met his now, blue and unwavering, and he felt the shift, a crack in the armor of protocol. "I get it, but rules are there for a reason. This isn't a stray, it's federal property. One wrong move, and we're all liable." His words carried the weight of caution, yet he didn't reach for the radio. Instead, he poured coffee, the steam curling like fog on the highway, offering a mug to Jack without a word. Jack accepted it, the warmth seeping through the ceramic, but his focus remained on the cub. The creature stirred more fully, its head lifting weakly, nose twitching at the scents in the room. Coffee humans the faint pine from Tom's clothes. It let out a soft mewl, not distress, but hunger, its body arching toward Elena's hand as she prepared the formula bottle. She knelt beside the table, cradling it gently, the nipple brushing its muzzle. At first it turned away, instincts wary, but then latched on, suckling with tentative pulls that grew stronger. Tears pricked Elena's eyes, unbidden, her free hand steadying its head. In that act, small and profound, the room's tension eased, a momentary truce born of witness. Jack watched, his chest tight with unspoken emotion. The cub's trust, so freely given, reframed his isolation. He'd driven alone for years, but here, in this circle of strangers, he felt seen. Tom sipped his coffee in silence, his gaze softening as the cub fed. The sounds of life, soft swallows, rhythmic breaths, filling the space. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, carrying echoes of the reserve's vastness, a reminder that survival demanded more than rules. It required the courage to bend them. But as the cub finished, its body relaxing into sated sleep, a shadow crossed Tom's face. "That's buying time," he said quietly, setting his mug down. "But the feds won't wait. And if the mother's out there, tracking her scent—" He trailed off, the implication heavy, danger lurking beyond the clinic walls, a wild justice that could shatter their fragile vigil. Elena wiped her hands, her expression resolute. "Then we prepare, but we don't give up yet." She glanced at Jack, a silent invitation to the deepening bond. The cub's presence wove them tighter, forcing each to confront their stances, the ranger's duty, the vet's empathy, the hauler's redemption. As the clock edged toward the fed's arrival, the air hummed with rising tension, the cub's steady breaths a beacon in the gathering storm. Compassion had ignited this moment, but the choices ahead would test its fire, revealing the true measure of their humanity in the face of the wild's unyielding call. The clinic's back room felt like a pressure cooker now, the air thick with the mingled scents of formula and tension, as the afternoon light slanted lower through the blinds, painting the walls in amber hues. The cub lay curled under the heat lamp, its white fur fluffed from the warmth, but its breaths came in uneven hitches, a subtle warning that Elena couldn't ignore. She'd seen it before, the deceptive calm after crisis, when the body rallied only to falter harder. Jack sat motionless on his stool, his coffee long gone cold, fingers laced tightly as if holding the cub's fragile rhythm in his grip. Every shallow rise of its chest pulled at him, echoing the nights he'd sat vigil by Sarah's bedside, powerless against the inevitable. This time, though, inaction wasn't an option. The cub's trusting gaze from earlier lingered in his mind, a silent accusation against his years of drifting. Elena checked the IV site again, her gloved fingers tracing the line with clinical care. But her eyes betrayed the worry, etching deeper lines across her forehead. The electrolytes had perked it up, the feeding a small victory, but the hypothermia's chill had seeped into its core, stirring complications she could only guess at without full diagnostics. Blood work would confirm, But the portable machine in the corner hummed to life under her hands, drawing a tiny sample from the cub's vein. It mewed softly at the prick, a sound like wind through dry leaves, its blue eyes fluttering open to fix on her face. Not in fear, but in weary plea. Elena's breath caught, her own hand trembling as she labeled the vial. In that instant, the vet's armor cracked. She saw her brother in the cub's vulnerability, the way he'd reached for her in his final moments, trusting her to pull him back. "Hang on, little one," she whispered, the words barely audible, a private vow against the encroaching doubt. Tom lingered by the door, his broad frame blocking the draft from the hallway, radio silent for now, but heavy in his pocket. The Fed's ETA had shrunk to 90 minutes after his last check-in, their voices clipped and procedural over the line, demanding coordinates and containment protocols. He paced a slow circuit, boots scuffing the linoleum, his mind mapping the risks. A cub this young could harbor parasites from the wild, or worse, draw the mother's wrath if she scented it here. White tigers weren't just rare, they were ghosts of a disrupted balance, bred in captivity, yet yearning for the untamed. Tom's patrols had shown him the cost of human meddling, carcasses left by poachers, litters orphaned by fences. Yet watching Jack's quiet devotion, the hauler's rough hands, hovering protectively, stirred an unwelcome empathy. "It's perking up," Tom said gruffly, breaking the hush, though his eyes said otherwise. The cub's tail flicked weakly, a sign of life, but the labored undertone in its rumble spoke of deeper struggle. Jack met Tom's gaze, his voice low and steady. "Perking up ain't enough, not if they haul it off like cargo." The words carried the weight of his isolation, the endless roads, where he'd learned to fix engines but not hearts. The cub shifted then, its paw extending toward him across the blanket, nails sheathed in innocence. Jack's hand closed gently around it, feeling the rapid pulse beneath the soft pads, a connection raw and unspoken, binding him to this wild orphan. In the cub's touch, he glimpsed redemption, not erasing Sarah's loss, but honoring it through action, choosing to stand against the indifference that had hollowed him. The machine beeped, results scrolling across the small screen, and Elena's face paled. Elevated white cells, signs of infection brewing from exposure, pneumonia likely, the cold highway seeping into lungs too small for such betrayal. "It's fighting an infection," she said, her tone measured but urgent, peeling off her gloves to prepare antibiotics. "We need to start this now, IV push, but without the right facility—" She trailed off, the implication hanging like frost in the air. The cub's eyes widened, sensing the shift, its body tensing as Elena administered the dose. It didn't cry out, only pressed closer to Jack's warmth, its breath quickening into shallow pants that filled the room with quiet desperation. Tom stepped forward, his hand on the radio, duty clawing at him. "Elena, that's it. We can't play hero. Call them in early. Let the specialists handle the heavy lifting." His words were edged with the ranger's code. Protect the species, not the individual. Contain the chaos before it spilled. But as the cub's flanks heaved, a low whine escaping its throat, Tom's resolve wavered. He'd buried too many reports of failed rescues, the wild, silent justice claiming what humans couldn't save. This cub, with its ethereal white coat and pleading silence, forced him to confront his own failures, a patrol years back where he'd chosen protocol over a wounded wolf pup, watching it fade in the underbrush. Eleanor shook her head, her hands steadying the cub's head as the medication flowed. And what if they decide it's too far gone? Euthanasia in some lab because it's safer. Tears welled but didn't fall, her voice hitching on the moral precipice. The room pulsed with suspense, each breath a decision point, surrender to the system, or defy it for the spark of hope in those blue eyes. Jack's grip tightened on the cub's paw, his own breath syncing with its rhythm, a silent prayer forming in the spaces between. "We give it a fighting chance here," he murmured, the words a quiet thunder. "It's already come this far on trust." The cub relaxed fractionally as the antibiotics took hold, its eyes closing in exhausted surrender. But the crisis lingered, a shadow over their vigil. Outside, the wind howled sharper, rattling the windows like an omen from the reserve, where secrets stirred in the pines. Tom's radio crackled faintly, a preliminary from the feds, voices demanding updates, but he muted it. The silence, a fragile rebellion. Elena monitored the vitals, her trembling hand brushing the cub's fur, while Jack held steady, the bond deepening in the hush. Compassion had drawn them into this web, but the rising tide of consequences tested its strength, forcing each to weigh safety against the wild call of redemption. As the clock ticked mercilessly, the cub's faint rumble echoed, a reminder that survival wasn't guaranteed, but the choice to fight was theirs alone. In that suspended moment, with the sun dipping toward the horizon, the three humans encircled the small life, their breaths mingling in the dimming light. The cub's struggle mirrored their own inner tempests, peeling back layers of fear and regret, forging an alliance born of necessity and quiet courage. But the Fed's approach loomed, a storm on the edge, threatening to shatter the fragile sanctuary they'd built. The white tiger cub, symbol of misunderstood majesty, lay at its heart, its every gasp a plea for the humanity it instinctively sought. The shadows in the clinic's back room deepened as the afternoon waned, the amber light giving way to a cooler grey that seeped through the blinds like regret. The cub's breaths had steadied after the antibiotics, a fragile rhythm that lulled the room into uneasy quiet. But Elena knew better than to trust it. She sat cross-legged on the floor now, her back against the cabinet, stethoscope draped around her neck like a talisman, eyes fixed on the small rise and fall under the heat lamp. The infection was stubborn, its grip hidden in the cub's core, manifesting in the subtle tremors that rippled through its pores. Jack remained rooted to his stool, his hand still loosely encircling the cub's foreleg, the warmth of its fur a quiet anchor against the chill of uncertainty. Tom's pacing had slowed to a restless lean against the doorframe, his radio a silent weight in his pocket, the Fed's arrival now ticking down to under an hour. Outside, the wind from the reserve picked up, whispering through the cracks in the building, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth that made the walls feel thinner. The cub stirred, its blue eyes cracking open, not in alertness, but in a dazed haze, pupils dilating wide against the dim light. A low whine escaped, softer than before, but laced with an edge that set Elena's nerves alight. She rose swiftly, gloved hands pressing gently along its abdomen, feeling the tension beneath the soft white coat. "It's bloating," she murmured, her voice a thread in the hush. Internal pressure, perhaps from the fluids or the infections spread, gas building where it shouldn't, a crisis uncoiling like a hidden spring. The cub's flanks quivered, its body arching instinctively, paws scrabbling weakly at the blanket as if seeking escape from the invisible trap. Jack's grip tightened, not restraining but supporting, his breath hitching in sync with the cub's labored pulls. He'd seen engines seize on the road, metal grinding to a halt under strain, but this was different, life's machinery, delicate and unforgiving. The cub's eyes met his, wide with a primal confusion, and in that gaze, Jack glimpsed a deeper fracture in himself. Sarah's final hours flooded back unbidden, the way her chest had heaved against the pain, her hand clutching his until the strength ebbed. He'd whispered promises then, empty against the monitor's beeps, driving away the grief in endless miles. But here, with this wild orphan, inaction clawed at him, demanding he rewrite that passivity. "Easy, little one," he breathed, his voice rough as gravel, thumb stroking the cub's ear in slow circles. It leaned into him, a tremor running through its frame, the trust piercing deeper than any roar could. Tom pushed off the door, his boots thudding softly as he crossed to the table, peering down with the eyes of a man who'd tracked predators through underbrush. The cub's distress mirrored the reserve's harsh truths. Litters lost to starvation, mothers driven off by human encroachment. He'd enforced boundaries for years, turning away pleas from locals with injured fawns or foxes, knowing intervention often prolonged suffering. But this white rarity, its pale form a beacon of misplaced innocence, stirred the ghosts of his own regrets. A decade back, during a storm patrol, he'd found a wolf pup much like this, half-drowned and pleading, but protocol had tied his hands. Relocation meant a cage, not freedom. He'd walked away, the whine echoing in his dreams. Now, watching the cub's silent battle, Tom's hand hovered near his radio, duty warring with the raw pull of redemption. "We can't fix this alone," he said quietly, the words heavy, not accusation, but shared burden. "The feds have the gear, ultrasound specialists. Holding on's noble, but—" Elena didn't look up, her hands already preparing a syringe of simethicone to ease the bloat, her movements precise despite the tremor in her chest. The cub's whine sharpened, a sound like cracking ice on a frozen stream, its body curling inward as pain rippled through. She administered the injection subcutaneously, the needle's prick drawing only a faint flinch. The creature's eyes squeezing shut in exhausted surrender. "Noble or not, it's what's right," she replied, her tone steady but laced with the hitching breath of held-back tears. Her brother's face flashed in her mind, the ravine, the mud, the way she'd arrived too late to bridge the gap between safety and wild peril. Wildlife wasn't just cases, it was echoes of personal silences, chances to extend the compassion she'd denied herself. The cub's response came slowly, the bloating easing fractionally, but the infection's fever crept in, its nose warming under her touch. She adjusted the IV, adding a low-dose anti-inflammatory, the drip a steady counterpoint to the gathering storm. The room pulsed with moral suspense, each second a choice etched in silence. Jack's free hand clenched at his side, knuckles whitening as the cub's head lolled toward him, nuzzling weakly into his palm. In that gesture, a late revelation unfurled. Not words, but instinct's quiet truth. The cub's scent, faint and wild, stirred a memory buried deep. Sarah's garden, where a stray kitten had wandered in during her illness, curling at her feet with the same unyielding trust. Jack had shooed it away then, fearing more loss. But now the parallel reframed everything. This wasn't just rescue, it was atonement. The cub's plea, unlocking the man he'd locked away, forcing him to confront the emptiness of roads unshared. "It knows me," he whispered more to himself, the words a bridge across species, raw and unadorned. Tom nodded slowly, his stance shifting from sentinel to ally, the radio remaining untouched. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the windows like the reserve's unspoken warning, but in here, the three formed a fragile circle around the cub, breaths mingling in vigil. Elena monitored the vitals, her hand lingering on the cub's chest, feeling the heart's defiant beat. The bloat subsided further, the whines fading to soft puffs, but the fever lingered, a shadow testifying to the wild's resilience and fragility. Jack held steady, his presence a quiet vow, while Tom's eyes softened, the ranger's code bending under the weight of witness compassion. As the clock edged closer to the Fed's arrival, the cub settled deeper into sleep, its body relaxing against the odds. Paws curling in dreams of shadowed forests. The tension simmered, not resolved but transformed, a bond forged in crisis, pulling them toward the unknown horizon where instinct met humanity. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting the clinic in twilight's hush, a cinematic pause before the inevitable clash. The white tiger cub, symbol of misunderstood strength, breathed on, its survival a mirror to their own quiet redemptions, whispering that in the face of fear, kindness was the truest roar. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of this white tiger reach more people who still believe in kindness. The twilight deepened outside the clinic, the grey light bleeding into indigo as the wind from the reserve howled its final warnings against the windows. Inside the back room, the air hung heavy, saturated with the scent of antibiotics and the cub's faint, musky warmth, a fragile testament to the hours of defiance. Elena hovered over the exam table, her stethoscope pressed to the cub's chest, listening to the erratic thrum beneath the pale fur. The infection had clawed back, fever spiking despite the IV, the cub's breaths now ragged pulls that rattled like dry leaves in a gale. Its blue eyes, once clear and pleading, glazed over in exhaustion, paws twitching in futile resistance. Jack's hand remained entwined with its foreleg, his calloused fingers a steady anchor. But his face had paled, the lines of grief etching deeper as memories of Sarah's labored final breaths overlapped with this small struggle. Tom stood by the door, his silhouette stark against the dimming light, radio finally keyed in his grip. The feds were minutes away, their truck's distant rumble cutting through the wind like an approaching verdict. He'd delayed as long as conscience allowed, but the cub's worsening state forced the call, protocol's cold logic over the warmth of their vigil. "They're here," he said quietly, his voice stripped of its earlier edge, carrying only the weight of inevitability. The ranger's eyes lingered on the cub, a flicker of regret shadowing his features. In the silence that followed, the room contracted. The three humans bound by the invisible threads of shared witness, each confronting the precipice where compassion met the world's unyielding rules. Elena's hands trembled as she adjusted the oxygen flow, the mask fogging with each shallow exhale from the cub. The bloat had eased, but the fever burned hotter, sapping the strength they'd fought to restore. She whispered encouragements, words lost in the hush, her own breath hitching as the cub's body arched in a sudden spasm. A seizure, brief but brutal, its limbs stiffening before collapsing limp. "No," she breathed, gloved fingers flying to stabilize, injecting a low-dose sedative to calm the tremors. Tears escaped now, tracing silent paths down her cheeks, the vet's composure fracturing under the raw plea in those fading eyes. Her brother's death replayed in fragments, the ravine's mud, his hand slipping from hers, but this cub, with its instinctive lean into her touch, reframed the loss. It wasn't failure, it was the wild's demand for presence, for the small acts that bridged chasms. Jack felt the spasm through his grip, the cub's paw clenching around his thumb in a desperate hold, and something profound shattered within him. The late revelation came not in words, but in the cub's gaze, locking onto his one final time, blue depths mirroring the emptiness he'd carried since Sarah's passing. In that instant he saw the truth. The cub wasn't just a stray he'd saved, it was the echo of his unborn child, the life Sarah had whispered hopes for before the illness stole it all. Miscarriage, buried in grief's silence, had left him adrift, fixing trucks instead of futures. But here, in this trembling form, instinct recognized his own unspoken wound, the hauler's rough hands, meant for cradling, not just cargo. "I won't let go," he murmured, his voice breaking the room's tension like a crack in ice. Tears blurring his vision as he stroked the cub's flank. The bond, forged on the highway's edge, deepened into redemption, pulling him from isolation's depths. Tom lowered the radio, the feds' voices fading unanswered as he crossed to the table, his broad hand resting on Jack's shoulder, a silent concession from duty to humanity. The ranger had chased shadows in the reserve for years, enforcing lines that divided man from beast, but the cub's struggle blurred them. He'd failed that wolf pup long ago, choosing safety over risk. But now, watching Jack's quiet vow, Tom felt the shift. Silent justice wasn't in reports or relocations, but in the courage to stand against the tide. The cub's breaths evened fractionally, the sedative easing the seizure's grip. its body curling toward Jack's warmth as if scenting the redemption in his touch. The door burst open then, the feds striding in, two agents in crisp uniforms, faces set in professional detachment, carrying a transport crate that clanged against the floor. Questions flew in clipped tones, origins, vitals, containment. Elena recited the details, her voice steady through the haze of exhaustion, while Tom coordinated the handover, his stance protective. But as they approached the table, the cub stirred one last time, a weak chuff escaping, its head lifting toward Jack with unwavering trust. The lead agent paused, gloved hand hovering, the room's emotional undercurrent piercing even their protocol. "It's stable enough for transport," he said, but softer, glancing at the trio's faces. "We'll get it to the sanctuary. Best chance there." Jack released the paw slowly, his hand lingering, the cub's warmth imprinting on his skin like a promise. They loaded it gently into the crate, the door latching with a soft click that echoed like finality. As the agents wheeled it out into the night, the wind swallowing their footsteps, the three stood in the emptying room, the heat lamp's glow fading to embers. Silence wrapped them, heavy with the weight of what had passed, not loss, but transformation. The cub would fight on in specialized care, its white fur a symbol of survival's quiet majesty, misunderstood yet resilient. In the days that followed, Jack returned to the roads, but changed. The blanket from his truck now carried the cub's scent, a talisman against the miles. Elena found solace in her work, the cub's trust mending old fractures, while Tom patrolled with renewed vigilance, eyes scanning for the mother who'd birthed such a rarity. Word spread through Elmwood in whispers, a tale of compassion born from a mistaken puppy, reminding the town that behind fear lay bonds worth forging. Months later, Jack visited the sanctuary, standing at the enclosure's edge as the cub, now a sleek juvenile, stripes vivid against white, paced with newfound strength. It paused, nose twitching at his familiar scent, a low rumble of recognition bridging the fence. In the distance, under a vast sky streaked with dawn, the white tiger paused, glancing back before vanishing into the horizon's embrace, its form a ghost of hope against the wild's endless call. Survival whispered of instinct's loyalty, of humans who chose kindness amid the shadows, proving the world still held space for redemption's quiet roar. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of man thinks he saved a puppy, but the vet realizes it's a white tiger cub. See you in the next one.